There are times when I am wrong. Not many, unless you ask my wife, and then I would think that she would say I underestimate my wrongness.
You're a vitamin.
I'm a vitamin?
Mm-hmm. Just once a day.
Yeah, at least once a day. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Actually, I will take that. If I'm wrong only once a day, I can handle that. That makes me happy.
I didn't say you're only wrong once a day. I just said somebody points it out.
Okay. So it's to the degree that it needs to be pointed out once a day.
Yes.
Fair.
You're a vitamin.
Well, we are talking about 5 predictions that we got wrong about the future of the church. I actually dug so I did this one. I wrote this one, and I dug around in some old material because it's all out there. That's the great thing about the internet. And I thought, man, let's just talk about the stuff like that we predicted a while back, and that we didn't get right. So this will be a fun episode. But I will say this: you can't go wrong with Upward Sports.
Ooh, segue.
Yeah, I don't ever really think about my segues until I get there, and so sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Upward Sports is a wonderful organization that helps churches reach out into their community. This is not a sports program. This is an outreach program. It's it includes sports, and it's a great bridge. Sports is a wonderful bridge to your community. What this does is it helps you reach your community. So you can kick off this year with a purpose. You can use sports to fuel outreach ministry in your church. Upward is that best in class resource that I think every church should be examining. Like, is this for you? Probably is. So schedule your call with them today. Upward.org/churchanswers is where you can do that. And I know you can Google them, but if you will help us out and go to upward.org/churchanswers, that will tell them that we sent you. And that will help the show because they are very gracious to sponsor the show. And if this is something that interests you, hey, let them know that we're the ones that sent you. So upward.org/churchanswers, link in the show notes. If you're wondering how to do outreach better, this is where you need to start. All right, Dad. We got some things wrong back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of time at the beginning of the year, the prognosticators will come out and say, this is where the world is going. We've done that before. Sometimes we've gotten things right, and sometimes we've gotten things wrong. So I thought, let's shake it up a little bit. Let's start the new year off on the wrong foot by talking about what we got wrong. And I'm going to start with you because this was one of my favorite Thom Rainer predictions of all time. It wasn't really a prediction. It was more of a comment in a book, your first solo book that you wrote in the 90s. And you at least had questions about whether or not Sunday school would survive into the millennium. Well, Dad, we're a quarter century into the millennium.
Happy New Year.
Yes, we're a quarter century into the millennium now. And Sunday school is still around.
Well,
what say you?
I got some responses to that. Overall, it is correct that I got it wrong. Okay, let's just start there. Sunday school is still alive. It did survive into the millennium. This is 2025. It did survive a quarter of a century into the millennium. So, yeah, I did get that wrong. So one other thing that I want to say is not even related to this bullet point. I just was waiting for you to stop so I could talk about something else. I'll tell you something else I got wrong, and I'll come back to this. I missed Upward as a pastor. And if I had known about Upward when I was a pastor, it would have been one of my primary outreach tools. I'm thinking of my 4 churches where I served as pastor. One of them out in the middle of nowhere, but we had a field, so we could have used Upward Sports. The next one, man, we could have gone to the beach and used Upward Sports because we were right there near the Gulf of Mexico. That would have been a possibility. The next one, we had a beautiful recreation center. I mean, basketball gym, skating area, beautiful. And yeah, we used it for
racquetball there. There were racquetball courts.
And there was kilns. where you could go and make shapes with clay. So we had a lot, and we did a little bit of outreach. Could have done a lot more, and so I regret the fact that I did not do. And I skipped Louisville because Louisville had a field, and I could go on. It was more like my first church, just a little bit larger. So I could have done more with Upward, and now I'm touting Upward, not just because they are our sponsor, but because I see the efficacy and the blessing that it brings. So that's just an added comment. Now, back to Sunday school. So I'm going to give you a yes, but. Okay? A yes, but. No, I'm not even at it depends. I'm going to say, yes, I missed it by making a categorical statement that Sunday school would not survive the turn of the millennium. Yes, I missed it. However, when I was thinking Sunday school, and I can tell you what I was thinking about back in 1994, whenever that book was published. I don't remember when that book was published. I think you're talking about the Book of Church Growth, if I recall correctly. So whenever that book was published, this was Sunday school to me. Sunday school was always on campus, one. Number two, it was almost always using quarterly literature, usually denominational sponsored. So even if it was not in a denomination, many non-denominational churches use denominational curriculum. I know because when I was at Lifeway, we were still selling them to some non-denominational churches for several years. And third, many resources were built around Sunday school. I mean, there was a plethora of things that were connected to Sunday school. That is not how Sunday school exists now. Quite frankly, Sam, I can't tell the difference between Sunday school and small groups if you get down to it. I mean, you could say one's off campus and on campus. That doesn't work. You could say there's a fixed curriculum, non-fixed curriculum. That doesn't work. You could say what's open or closed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to me, it's groups. And a lot of leaders have understood that. That's the issue. Getting people together for fellowship, getting people together to do ministry, getting people together to talk about truth and doctrine, getting people together to reach their community through their class. So yeah, I missed it. But the model of Sunday school that existed then largely does not exist today. And if you define Sunday school the way that I was thinking about it, I got it. But I'm going to do a mea culpa and say, I almost got it. And then we'll turn around and say, okay, I admit I was wrong. Is that good enough?
That's fine. I'm glad that you defended yourself a little bit there. It makes for an interesting conversation.
Well, the name Sunday school still exists.
Correct. An open group with multiplication and outreach as its purpose, very few churches do that.
Exactly. And quite frankly, when Sunday school was even king in the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, it didn't do it like it did in the 50s and the 60s. So even evangelism was waning by then. But let me get to you. You start off telling me I'm wrong. I'm going to come back and tell you were wrong. You said that multi-ethnic churches would become the fastest growing churches, and you said that back in the 2010s. What is disturbing is not that you got it wrong. It is that you're old enough to have been making predictions in 2010, and I'm your father.
Yes. Yeah, so I started writing in the mid 2000s, blogging back when blogging was a thing, and doing church research really in the late 2008, 2009 is when I kind of started digging in pretty deeply. And I was convinced that multi-ethnic churches would become the fastest growing churches. And here's why. It's because the demographers at the time, so, we're talking 15 years ago now. Yeah. The demographers, so the 2010 census had just come out. And all of a sudden, people are really dissecting the data. And the growth of ethnic minorities in the nation was beginning to capture the attention of people. And it's right around that time when demographers, and myself included, were looking at the data going, hey, somewhere around 2040, the U.S. is going to become minority white. And in many ways, preschools were already there. 2015, I think, is right around when preschools in the U.S. became minority white. Mm-hmm. You're looking at the data and you're just going, well, if a church is going to grow, it's going to be a church that grows with the community. And this is how it's going to grow because these are the people that are here. So it wasn't a statement so much on race, although I do think multi ethnic churches reflect heaven and are wonderful. I wasn't making a statement so much on race as I was just the reality of demographics. Well, multi-ethnic church is harder than what people were thinking at the time. Nobody was thinking how difficult this was going to be because you can combine ethnicities, but many times you're also combining cultures. And
Mm-hmm.
I know in my own church, we have around 15 to 20 nationalities represented,
Mm.
most of that Central and South America, but others too. And it's even if you share a language like Spanish, it's still hard to combine all of these different kinds of people. And so I tell my church, hey, it's harder, but it's healthier. And we're not there yet. We're about 25% multi-ethnic when our community is 45% multi-ethnic. So we, I think we do things fairly well at West Bradenton, but even then we haven't arrived. So I still think this is the future. I just think I was really premature in what I was saying. And frankly, it's probably going to happen when my children are adults. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of missed the boat on millennials being able to do this. It's just not coming to fruition in my own generation.
Well, number one, your church is doing an incredible job. When I walk into West Bradenton, I see multi ethnicity. Yeah, I do see more white faces than others, but I still see multi ethnicity. And here's the thing about it: the more I'm in the church, the more I don't recognize it, which is an indication that they're melding together. I'm not looking as much at the skin color; it's just how they're interacting with each other.
Yeah, and frankly, the future divide will be socioeconomic more than racial or cultural. Well, socioeconomic is cultural, but I think people understand what I'm saying. But
And here's another
probably
part:
20 years away. We're still probably 20 years away, frankly.
you're not alone. You know, of the two major parties in the United States, Republican and Democrat, there was a lot written because of this new demography that was to take place, which is now that the Democrat Party would become dominant. And there would really only be mostly a one party system. I'm not making political comments, folks. I'm doing demographic comments. So just please hear me on this and political science comments, if you will. And so what happened was that those predictions, and there's one particular author whose name I cannot recall. Those particular predictions were based similar to what you were doing. These were the ethnic groups, and they were largely Democrat, not Republican. And now what is happening is we have these different subgroups or groups that there may be some of the Hispanic population in the Democrat Party. There may be some in the Republican Party, and they're. I don't want to use identity because there is identity politics. I just got to be so careful. But who they are is more not related to their ethnicity. It's related to maybe their socioeconomics, maybe their age, and maybe a combination of age and race. For example, African American young males moved over to Republicans a little bit more. That would not have been predicted. So, and I could go on both sides of that, but my point is, you were not alone in predicting that demography. Some of the most experienced political scientists and statisticians and researchers were watching this happen too. And I would have predicted it had I looked at your data. But let's ask this question. What about that multi-site church? Here's a unique thing about the multi-site church. You, to my knowledge, have researched that as much as anyone. I know that John Vaughn has, and I know that my mind's going blank on another researcher on multi-site or written about it. But
Jim
yours,
Tomlin.
what's that?
Jim Tomlin. But he does mega church stuff.
Yes, his is related more. But as far as just and John Vaughn does more on megachurch too, or did more. I haven't heard from him in a while. And the reason you hear multi-site from him because at the time he was doing megachurch, that was the primary growth mechanism. So you predicted that not the megachurch, the multi-site church would create this new position called a multi-site administrator. You predicted that back in 2010, so 15 years ago, and that has not happened. I don't blame you for making that prediction, but I want to hear your thoughts on it before I even have a commentary.
Well, technology caught up. And I remember, so I was serving in a multi-site church in the mid 2000s, mid to late 2000s, and basic things like who got the small group curriculum. Well, it's at the other campus. Oh goodness, the mail came to the wrong place. Sorry, this is not the right number. Landlines and all that stuff. So what I thought right around 2010 was, wow, an administrator, not like an executive pastor, but an actual administrator that deals with the fact that there are all these logistical problems
Right.
with multi-site churches, particularly obviously in the same community. So they're all spread out over roughly a 50-mile radius. You're going to have to administrate this thing. Well, guess what? We got better project management software. What that you got better communication. No one uses a landline anymore. We can stream services now. Streaming was not a thing in 2010.
We
So
can
when I
meet virtually like this podcast we're doing.
yeah, just getting the feed from like if you did a live feed from one campus to the next, or even just something like putting in the DVD. These are things we did back in 2010
Yeah.
with multi-site churches. So I thought this is an administrative nightmare. This is a logistical nightmare. All of these churches that want to go multi-site are going to need a multi-site administrator. No, technology caught up quickly and it kind of just didn't become a thing. I still think we could use some help with logistics and administration in churches. That hasn't gone away, but you don't necessarily need someone who is simply focused on the administration of the multi-site system. So while I still think that was a really good prediction.
It was. With the
I
data you had, it was.
Little did I know that technology would fill that gap.
And here's a point. You and I are largely database more than experiential based. And we take what we see. And if it's a straight trend line, we can project it forward and say, this is what it looks like. And it's when it's not the straight line or the same shape line, that's when we might get it wrong because we're data-based.
Yeah. So somewhere in the mid 2010s, and I put mid 2010s because I think you made this prediction multiple times in some articles and blogs, is
Hmm.
that you genuinely believe that evangelism would return to its rightful place and the churches would begin to prioritize evangelism. I read that with a lot of hope, and I was obviously praying that you were right, but you aren't. We still, 10 years later, we're still struggling with this.
Not only are we still struggling, we're struggling more. And the decline rate is increasing, which means we are falling faster. And so not only did I miss that one, I missed it badly because I had it going one direction and it went in another direction, probably at the same rate. I don't have the numbers, but probably at the same rate increase, it became a decrease. Now, why did I make that prediction? Let's just put that there. One of the reasons I made that prediction is because there were a number of groups that were moving toward a more conservative theology. And if you read Dean Kelly's book and others, they say conservative theology leads to growth. A lot of that is going to be conversion growth, and a lot of that is going to be evangelistic growth. So that was one of the reasons that I said this is going to happen. Next reason I thought was that I thought that churches would get to the point. I don't want to say desperation, but they would say we have to have some kind of growth other than transfer growth. And I think that was an accurate reality that transfer growth would not last forever. And in fact, the transfer growth and its erosion, the lack of transfer growth, has actually sped up. So I think those were right. But here's what has happened: conservatism has not led to evangelism. In fact, in many cases, conservatism has led to, well, we got this fight over, let's go to our next fight. And it's become one issue after another. And conservatism has not also led to an urgency that I would have predicted, that there was going to be an urgency that is there. And to the contrary, it seems as if more and more churches are trying to focus upon the things that they think they can do easily rather than the things that they can do obediently. I missed that one. I'm sorry I missed it, but I missed it badly.
Yeah, well, let's hope that it still happens. Maybe with some of these we were just off on timing and not entirely. Now, this last one still baffles me. It is it is one that I still, from an economic perspective, I still can't figure out exactly what happened here, and I think a lot of economists are still kind of going, hmm. what's happening. So during the pandemic, you and I warned churches that what would come following the pandemic would be a recession. Now we're not doom and gloom. We were just predicting a recession. There was a technical recession
Exactly.
during the pandemic, but it was very short lived and clearly manufactured because we just shut everything down. So it's almost like you can't count that. So we could technically say we're right, but in reality, we were thinking that it would be something different. So
Yeah, I was thinking of a recession that would be eminently painful, house prices declining precipitously, incomes dropping by large percentages, people out of jobs by unheard of amounts. But no, it didn't happen.
yeah, I wasn't quite as doom and gloom, but I did think that home prices would drop, not go up.
Right.
I wasn't alone in that. If people knew that home prices were going to spike the way that they did, many more people would have been buying homes. So, this is one that I look at, and I know that we had a lot of liquidity pumped into the market, which then
Hmm.
created an inflationary environment. And I think most people agree that we pumped too much money into the economy. And with that came almost hyperinflation. Hopefully, we're getting that under control. But we still haven't seen that big dip. Charitable giving has been off a little bit the last couple of years, but not to the degree that we thought. So while we weren't all wrong on this one, we still have to have a bit of a mea culpa and say that what we were telling churches, hey, cut your budget by 10%, cut your budget by 15%. For most churches, that wasn't necessary. And we just missed it. Although for those who did and were very conservative with their funds and ended up in a surplus position, you're welcome. You're welcome.
There are good reasons behind it. You've already mentioned the main one. A lot of people are getting a lot of income into their families, into their businesses. And so they continue to spend and they continue to give. I'm not so sure that this is a miss as much as it is either a delay or more of an incremental issue where it's not going to all happen at one time, but now we're experiencing it one little step at a time. I hope it doesn't get bad, but the reality of it is it may. This one was easy to predict. It was much more difficult to say this is why it wouldn't happen. So you know, we I think we did well on all of these with what the data we had. That sounds pretty pitiful, but I think we did well with the data we had at the time.
Yeah, they were data driven predictions. It would have been an odd thing during the pandemic to be telling people to increase their budget and go buy a bunch of real estate. If you were saying that, you really were onto something. But by the way, whether it's good times or bad times, church growth services can help you. So certainly want to make a mention to them since we're talking about a recession, sponsor of the show. And
Yeah, and,
um,
and, and just as a reminder, Sam, since you mentioned CGS Church Growth Services, they're not just this fundraising company for a new building. They're a fundraising company for a renovation, particularly like a worship center or a welcome area. They're also a fundraiser to pay off debt. They're having more success with that and even deferred maintenance. So you mentioned them, but I always want to give an asterisk to the mention because that's what they're doing. But there's another thing I want to talk about. Unless you got another point, I'm going to get to this final thing here.
No, I was just going to say they've got a free campaign capacity analysis. It's a new tool they have. So,
It is
link
good
in the
too.
show notes for that. It's free. So go to churchanswers.com, click on this episode, or if you're on YouTube, click the link, get that free campaign capacity analysis. Every church should have one.
So one thing that is happening, Sam, income is going down in churches, a lot of churches. Right now, it is not as much economically driven as it is attendance driven. Your attendance correlates directly to your giving. And if is it Pew that has it 120 to 65? I'm trying to remember my source on that. But one of the main sources out there has worship attendance going down from 120 to 65. Again, I keep saying at least from a strong anecdotal perspective that it's more like 50, but I'm not going to argue 15 in attendance. My point here is churches can afford less things mainly because they're smaller. And so when we started my church staff, that was one of the things that we were thinking about. How would you like to have a stewardship pastor? What usually large mega churches can have, but you can have it for $100 a month, and you can get all the details on that, on how we do that and how we equip a person in your church to do that. Or what if you wanted a worship minister and you don't have one, and our champion, Mike Harlan, can help you find that person, and then month by month give that person resources and mentor them. And coming just any day now, Danny Franks talking about the welcome ministry, the hospitality ministry, the area where people are coming to your facility, to the worship services, and how we can get them to stick with, again, finding one person who can lead that in your church, whether your church is 20 in size or 200 or 400 in size. It's one of the, we've got an entire denomination that is looking at it right now, and it's something that is really growing. It's called My Church Staff, and you'll see the notes in the show link, or you can just go to churchanswers.com, and there's a tab for My Church Staff, any of those, and it's $100 a month, cancelable at any time. There's no contract. We love what's going on there. Love for you to be a part of it. Always, thank you for being a part of a Rainer on Leadership with the two Rainers who are here. Sometimes you get Rainer and Rainer. Sometimes you get Rainer. Sometimes you get Rainer and King. You never know what you're going to get, but we're always here for you. See you in the next episode.